Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversation with Calvin We the Species. This is my 10-day series in conjunction with the Garden State Film Festival. I've been interviewing actors, actresses, directors, filmmakers, production people. It's been an incredible journey for me. And I'm with Mark Shapiro and Dave CRETE, and this is heavy stuff and important stuff. The We're going to talk about the invisible enemy, hidden sacrifice, which is the film they made, and we've been talking now, actually for an hour, just getting acquainted and learning about the journey of Dave and the things he's discovered and uncovered about an area in Nevada that has. Well, I'm going to let them talk about this. I'm horrified. I'm shocked. I'm trying to process all this, and I took pages of notes from talking to Mark and Dave before we went on air about people should be recognized for their service and the things that have happened to these people as a result of nuclear testing and bad things in the soil, in the air, in the water. And I'm trying to process this. It's so powerful, and that's what their film is about, to bring awareness and maybe proactivity and activism to this most amazing story. Dave, of course, is an Air Force veteran, right?
Yep.
Mark has been involved in film, and so this is such a powerful documentary, and it may also be a proof of concept to take this and make it into a feed. I'm going to let them my monologue. This is so important for everybody to listen to because it's life. This is life, and this is people, and it's our people, or American citizens. It's powerful stuff, really powerful stuff. So my monologue is done. Uh, um, Mark, why don't you do a little brief background, and Dave, you do a background, and then we're going to jump in to the Invisible Enemy .org. Start, Mark.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate Calvin you taking the time with us today. As I mentioned, I'm Mark Shapiro, co-director of The Invisible Enemy, along with Douglas Brian Miller, who's not here today. We also directed a feature film called Downwind, which is available on Peacock. Downwind tells a story about nuclear weapons testing and the impact of radiation and fallout on unsuspecting communities. We met Dave at a Downwind screening in Las Vegas a couple of years ago, and he approached us and told us his story about military personnel who served honorably at the Nevada test site and uprange. The test site itself is the size of Rhode Island. It's a giant swath of land, huge, huge piece of land in Nevada. It's all restricted. There's a fence around the entire site. And Dave told us a story about how they were exposed to radiation and fallout, and what happened to him, and the fact that when they served there, they were classified. They, weren't reckoned. They were doing something that was classified, and so therefore, years later, they can't be covered by any sort of health insurance or benefits for themselves or their family. So we felt like it was an incredibly important and related story to what we had told in Downwind. And when you tell the truth, it's a pretty remarkable, moving story. And so, we were really honored to be able to tell the story.
Yeah, wow, wow. Dave?
So I'm Dave Crete, and again, thanks, Calvin, for doing this. For us, the invisible enemy is very, very important because this is how we're getting our message out. So thank you for giving us the opportunity. So currently, by day, I'm a real estate broker in Las Vegas. My wife and I have a little real estate boutique real estate. All of my spare time for the last many years has been dedicated to researching and creating an organization and advocacy for a group of guys that I served with, men and women that I served with. Some served after, but we all have this, the nexus for all of us is we served in the same general area. And what happened, and how we got all this started was many years ago, like 14, 15, 2014, 2015, that winter, spring. We had a reunion at my house because of social media. We found one another. When I left the range in 1987, there was no emails, there was no cell phones, there's no social media. You didn't stay in contact. You didn't have the different channels of communication like you do now. So through those, we start finding everybody. And we have a reunion at the house, and one of the guys that's there speaks up. This is kind of the beer drinking precursor to the weekend. And one of the guys asked a question if anybody else had tumors. And I do have tumors, and at that point I had also had one removed, that was the size of a grapefruit in my back. And what we find out is that with the 8 people in my backyard, including myself, 6 of us had tumors. They're like marbles under your skin. And a 7th guy goes, I don't have any, but my son was born with tumors who was conceived when I was uprange. And I responded with, I have a son that was born with something called neurofibromatosis, which is a tumor related disorder where tumors can grow on your nerve endings. My son has a brain tumor that he's lived with his entire life. And it causes a lot of difficulties. I mean, it is a life altering thing to have. So, we all start talking about this. We all have this, and over time we keep talking, and we find out people have more and more problems. And I'm researching. When I went to college, to me it was all about numbers. It was economics and some statistics and some accounting and anything that had to do with numbers. That was my thing, and I love to research. Every time I'm doing something, I want to be learning something. So I started researching, understanding the nexus. We all worked in the same spot. But what's the likelihood? I don't know anything about these tumors except the doc says you have these tumors and they had to take one out. Never gave it another thought past that. They said it wasn't cancerous. It's all I cared about. So I find out that these tumors have a rate between 1 to 2 people per 1,000 will get these tumors. Well, the numbers guy in me went, okay, so how did we end up with 75% when it's 1/10 of 1%?
Wow.
It doesn't add up. And so we kept doing this research, and then in 2023, February, March 2023, I started telling the people that I worked with. I literally was doing the Zoom calls with a PowerPoint, very analytical, boring, dry stuff, and was showing you guys, look, this is the evidence. These are the government documents that I have that says this went on. They knew about it. They knew it was going to cause a problem. They didn't care. They didn't care enough to stop it. And this is why we all have these problems. This is why so many of us have kids with problems. This is why so many of us, our spouses who have had cancer, may be the source of it, because we brought this stuff home. We brought that dirt home. And it altered our reproductive systems. It caused us to have lots of problems. And like Mark alluded to, the issue with insurance, what the issue really is as a veteran, we're entitled to receive VA benefits. And I do receive some VA benefits, but for some of the issues, like I was explaining last night to somebody, the issue is we need to have our illnesses service connected. If you're a veteran and you don't have anything service connected, you're not going to the VA to get anything. I'm lucky enough to be able to go to the VA, but the real issue for us is that, one, to receive all of our benefits, it has to be service connected. Well, for the government, it's kind of, you weren't there, there isn't there, therefore you weren't exposed, therefore it's not our problem.
Because it's
That's
classified, right?
Correct. Because when we went up, I was 18 years old. I had a top secret security clearance. I went to a place that didn't exist, and I saw things that nobody ever saw.
Yeah.
I mean, for us, one of the big things that people know about now is we had the stealth fighter, the F-117 stealth fighter. I'm 18-year-old kid climbing in the cockpit of that with a pilot telling me all about it. And that's a bizarre looking airplane. And at that time, extraordinarily bizarre looking airplane. And you're seeing things that nobody else knows. So there was cool parts to it. But what we find out, I left the range in 87, and then we find out, in the 20 teens, as we start to reconnect, that there was a side effect. And you don't think, like, I have chronic bronchitis, right? My lung function 67%. You don't think that problem you have in your 50s is from something you did when you were 20. Right? I got out, and when I was 24 years old, I had a 6-year enlistment. I did my time. I got out. I went to college, grew my family and my business, and life continues. That's my introduction to adulting was the military, and you just don't put the math doesn't add up that it was something that happened a long time ago, and everybody else was the same as me, and nobody had any idea, because you don't want to think that your government's going to stick you somewhere where in the military, and I get people say, well, when you sign up for the military, you accept a certain amount of risk. You can go to war and you can die. You can go to war and you can use a limb. You can be on a training exercise and get injured or die. Right? We're out there working with weapons and explosives and doing what we do. But you don't think the actual place that they send you to work in Nevada, living in Las Vegas, is going to be what harms you. It's going to be the event that kills all your buddies. That's the reality. Is our buddies are dying while the government's saying, not my problem. And it's BS.
So that is the energy for the invisible energy to create this. All right, Mark. So why did Blacklist Docs decide to produce the invisible enemy hidden sacrifice? How did that come out?
Yeah, we were approached by David at a Downwind screening, as I mentioned, and we felt like it was really important that this truth be told. We had people that were impacted significantly, and their story needed to be told, and we had the means to do it. We had, experience telling stories like this and doing exposés on truths, and the more we dug into this, the more we were compelled to tell it in the way that we've told it.
Okay. So I guess you kind of answered it, but then maybe not. So Dave, why hasn't this kind of stuff, why hasn't anybody said anything about what you're talking about in decades? Is it because you discovered this and nobody knew?
I don't know that nobody knew, but nobody had ever done anything about it, at least not in the way that I had. I've never talked to anybody that's ever done this research, but that doesn't mean somebody else didn't do something. But, we all had, when you have the security clearances that we had, the government carries a very big stick over your head about, in military terms, shut your pie hole, sit down, shut up, and like it. And it's not about, the story isn't about what we did. It was cool. It was important. But it's about where we did it and what was known. And in fact, you can kind of look at it. You can blame somebody. You can say they did it to us because they knew. They 100% knew. It's not, I mean, I kind of look like if, for those of us my age and older, remember the Ford Pinto. And Ford did an analysis that said, yep, you know what? You rear-ended, it could blow up, but the liabilities associated with the number of deaths we expect is outweighed by the profit potential. And they got slapped around pretty good for that, and rightly so. But they made a decision. The government made the same decision with our health and lives and our families' health and lives by saying, you know what, the benefit to national security, these airmen are government property, and government property is disposable. So such is life. They literally come out and said that the benefit to national security outweighed the future environmental liabilities. So the juice was worth the squeeze.
Mhm.
And I just don't think that's a proper analysis. I don't think that's okay. There's inherent risk in what we did, but it should not simply be that the the place I slept at night was the danger.
Mhm.
That my dormitory uprange was creating the health issue, that the shower, the water I was showering in could create a health issue,
Mhm.
that the dirt we're out crawling around in and walking around in is creating the issue.
By the way, it's inconceivable. You don't even I can't even comprehend you walking around in soil that's injuring you. Anybody, from Oppenheimer on down has got to know that there's got to be a problem, with radioactivity. It's bad stuff, and wow. Um,
Calvin, you brought up Oppenheimer, which I think was apt in this moment. I think, and we all saw the movie, Oscar-winning movie, multiple Oscars. There's that moment in Oppenheimer where they're worried about what might happen when they're about to do the test,
that's
and
right. Yes.
take that into consideration for a second. These are the world's top scientists wondering if they're going to destroy the world. Well, I think they were thinking, are we going to blow up the planet, immediately? Is it going to be a significant blow, and this is going to be the end of everything? But what they, anytime something goes up, it comes down, right? And the invisible part of it, radiation is invisible, but it's detectable. Obviously, we can see it. And if you multiply that Oppenheimer test, which is, done in New Mexico, by not, almost 1,000 times, they did almost 1,000 tests at the Nevada test site. 100 of those were above ground, similar to what happened at Alamogordo. Nearly 900 were conducted underground, and some of these tests were, 50 to 60 times the size of a Hiroshima bomb. And they would shake, they would shake, they'd feel the vibrations in as far away as Los Angeles from the test site in Las Vegas. They could see flashes, in outlying parts of Los Angeles. They could feel things in San Francisco. So they were, think about it, when you're driving by a car and somebody's smoking in the car next to you, the smoke comes into your car. It's very interesting that it's invisible, but it's there. And like you said, every day they're out there walking around on the soil, they're drinking it, they're showering it, they're bringing articles of clothing home that their families are wearing. Dave mentioned it about his family, but we interviewed people. There's a woman in the film that we talked to where her grandparents and her parents have all died after service near at the test site, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, serving there. And the woman in our film did the laundry for her parents, and she herself and another person who lives in the same house as her now, generations later, have complications. So it's invisible, but it's detectable. And that's why we're calling it the invisible enemy. Obviously, you can talk to Dave about the name of the foundation that he started. But again, as a filmmaker, when you see a wrong, it was instilled in me as a child. When you see a wrong, you get it out there and make sure people understand what's going on. It can't exist in a vacuum. And that's the importance of film. What Dave has done is powerful. We're merely bringing it to the screen in the best way that we can.
And there's
Yeah.
a power, because you've been doing this, Mark. There's a power in activism because it works.
And by the way, again, taking another deep breath, that's a great comment. There is a power in activism, and activism does not see colored. Activism it is red, it is blue, it is independent, it is libertarian, it's everything. It's activism. And I am moved by activists. I mentioned that in our pre-conversation. I in Downwind, I was moved by people from marginalized communities, or even from backgrounds, Mormon backgrounds, where they come up to speak out against the government. That to me is power. That is powerful to get a kid. Dave was 18 years old when he started serving there, and now he's an activist going globally with this story. And it's that to me. There's nothing more American than that. There's nothing more nothing, the level of dedication to become an activist against, a government that is not recognizing them. And we asked, Doug and I asked in our interviews, we did, I don't know, 15 interviews, and in every interview we asked everyone who had served if they do it again, and everyone said they would. And there was a level to a point where what they can tell, they can only go to a certain point. They can talk about what they saw up there to a certain point, but every one of them stuck to that. So they are the most loyal people that I've met in my life as a filmmaker, the most loyal, the most American, and they should be going down in history as real profound leaders of democracy.
Funny, you're talking about activism, and you just sparked something in me, because you both said, it's American, and I'm a little bit of a student of history, and I remember a bunch of people got together and they threw tea in the harbor, and that's maybe that was the first American type of activism that led to the Revolutionary War and our independence. So we were born as a country. I'm thinking that listening to you, we were born as a country wearing activism.
And exactly, not just activism, but the beauty of the birth of democracy. And democracy is a moving object. It's an organism that keeps going, and it's doing what's right. It separates us from any other nation that isn't democratic. It's the power that we can speak our mind. We have free speech and knowledge and the ability to tell truths. And again, I'm going to say it again, as filmmakers, all we're doing is telling a story in black and white. We're not injecting our personal opinions. Dave and I probably voted differently in a lot of elections, but we speak the same language when it comes to truth. And this is an important thing to recognize. And a great analogy about the tea heart, the Boston Tea Party, and that's exactly what's happening. And that, again, activists should be celebrated. And this is why we're so concerned about politicians. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle they're sitting on, they need to hear this story. If you do something, if then, going back to Oppenheimer always talked about if then, cause and effect. You take care of the people that take care of your nation, and you respect them, and you do it in a way that supports and delivers democracy.
Dave, can you just kind of put it together, your mission here? I think listening to you, I kind of know the mission, but what would you?
So what we're trying to do, what the invisible enemy is trying to do, is what we're not asking for is a press release for the government to come out and say, oh my God, look at all these wonderful people that were just born. It's about when we go to the VA, right now we have a bill that's been introduced into Congress, and it's HR 1400. And what it's asking the government is to say, and there's some limits on it and things, which is inside baseball, Washington, D.C. stuff, but it's just to say that when I go to the VA and I say, I have this problem, like my neurologist, for my brain issues, I told her I was exposed to plutonium, and she says, well, that's the cause. But because the military says I was never exposed, the military says it's not our responsibility. I still get my health care from there, but the important thing then is to get it service connected, because it creates a different set of benefits. And frankly, and one of the things we're trying to protect is that benefit that we're asking for is, if our illness is service connected, when we pass, and it's because of that service connection, that there will be a benefit there for our spouses.
Mm-hmm.
And without that service connection, too bad, so sad. With that service connection, for example, in the film, there's a buddy of mine. He's got Parkinson's really bad. He was my first roommate. when I got stationed here in Vegas. The government doesn't do anything for him. They don't recognize his illness or people that have Parkinson's like him. And Parkinson's will be essentially his cause of death.
Mm.
It is service connected. And he's not well. I mean, he's not well, and his wife, who's his caregiver, because he's unable to work anymore, she gets no help, and there will be nothing there for her, and that's wrong. My OJT supervisor when I was uprange, my trainer, he died at 33. Very, very healthy guy, massive heart attack, drops dead, has 7 and 9-year-old boys and a widow. Wasn't service connected. So we're asking not only to help take care of us, but to make sure that there's a little bit of a parachute for the family. And then next, like I talked about my son that has neurofibromatosis, what we've learned, all 4 of our kids have a health issue. What we've learned is those health issues are common to everybody else that we worked with. One of my sons was born with a birth defect, which was surgically rectified, and he's been fine. My 2 daughters are not.
Oof.
So the government has never accepted responsibility for their actions being transferred to somebody's family. And, my son he had what's called an IEP, individual education plan, K through 12. So he had to be catered to through the special education process in order for him to have the opportunity to be successful. That's tough. And he asked questions about that. And he has concerns now that with him having kids in a family, and it's not okay to do that to people. It's not okay to deny responsibility. And so through HR 1400 and whatever follow-ons that we do, it's simply to make sure that those that were harmed are helped. We're not asking, this isn't some class action lawsuit where we're asking to all become millionaires. We're just saying, give us what anybody else should be given, accept responsibility for what's happened. It happened. No bill that I could introduce into Congress will ever unwind what's happened. That's not possible. But the government does have the ability to help. And denying that is just simply wrong. And these people, and let me say this too. The people that I worked with were handpicked. You went through an interview process. This wasn't, you drew the straw for going up there. You went through a process to be eligible. You had to be in the very top of whatever it was that you did. Our pilots were the best pilots. Our mechanics. I remember hearing one of the pilots that I've talked to over the last couple of years, and he said, when my crew chief pre-flighted my airplane, I never once worried that I even needed to look at it. He goes, you did. That's what you do. He goes, but if my crew chief said my plane was good, it was good. No question. Because he knew his crew chief was the best crew chief that the Air Force could produce. These people were amazing.
Yeah.
And so for me, the honor for me is to be able to fight for them because they were the best. And I was blessed to be a part of that, to be considered to be a part of that. And we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
We're going to fix it.
Yeah.
I think another thing that's critically important, it's easy for us to say, oh, the government should fix this, the government, but and people, we put the government in power. It's our responsibility as individuals, as voters, to put this information in front of the people who serve us. And we've heard in the past that as few as 10 people, if 10 people can come to their congressperson and mention what's going on, here, and to talk about coverage or lack of coverage, what's going on, with guys that served and women that served, in Nevada. What can be done? What can we do? It's not just on, it is on the legislators. Ultimately, they're the ones that are passing the laws, but we put them in power, and it's our responsibility to reach out as voters.
That's right.
So I'm hoping that one of the hopes for this film is that we don't just sit back and complain about the government not doing what they're told. Well, we have a responsibility to push them along, to get the truth in front of them, to tell them what's going on. Otherwise, we can just sit back and and complain, but we actually have a voice. And if enough of us, make our voice heard, we can get change to happen. And I know Dave, I know Cujo, his nickname. He's going to make this happen. He is passionate about what he does, and we as a voting populace need to get behind our politicians and tell them this is not right.
Correct. Correct. A quick off, just to kind of take it. I got to take a little inhalation. It's funny. I'm so in tuned to the air that I breathe. It was an old song, I think, from the '60s, before your times, guys. I have a little air purifier there. I'm so it works 24/7, and I think it makes a difference. Not that I have any. I don't have any. But anyway, off-topic question, just to take a deep breath. And I like this question. I borrowed it from one of my favorite journalists, Barbara. So here goes. You don't have to answer it, but excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
Who would I like to spend a day with?
Yeah.
Thomas Sowell.
I'm not.
I respect really smart people. I consider him to be one of those. You can learn so much from being around people smarter than you, and just to try to figure out what somebody, and he's just one, but to be able to try to figure out, you know, how do they think at a level and a way that's beyond my comprehension.
Okay. Good answer. Mark.
I would, I mean, there's so many. I could say Mother Teresa. I could say Barack Obama. I could say Ronald Reagan. I think he'd be an interesting. There's a film director named Mike Mills who I really admire his work and the way his mind thinks. It's really difficult to narrow that down to one.
This is just
Yeah, but I love the question.
Yeah, no, it's one of my favorite questions.
How about somebody from my like 4 or 5 generations ago in my own family? Like just to sit down and say, okay, explain how this all happened. But
It's funny you said that, because you talk about your own family, and my answer to that question is my grandfather. I showed you before I went on air that bottle of water. That was part of my writing a novel that changed my life. And of course, I later found out who was this energy that went into me to change. And I found out it was my grandfather from 1902. So I found this one picture of my grandfather in 1902 in Newark, that was taken in 1902. That's my grandfather, where my finger is. And you see what's on that table? That bottle of water. Rather haunting. So I'd like to spend a day with him. And actually, maybe I will one day, the way things go spiritually. All right, moving on. Back to business. Mark, why at this point in time are you covering this this topic?
well, as I mentioned, it was important for us to uh, magnify what had happened to Dave. Doug and I spent years and years on our film Downwind, through research. We read about different people that were impacted. Native American communities, Mormon communities, others that were downwind of the 928 nuclear weapons detonations at the test site, Nevada test site. And we did a little bit of research on military at the time, but we hadn't spoken to, we talked to a few, but we really, when we met Dave, we started to kind of dive into those individuals that were impacted, who'd served our country. Ironically, that they're there to serve our country, to make us stronger, which we're really thankful. We're thankful for that. In the early footage, Dave talked about this a little bit with the soldiers that were stationed at the test site. They were there in a lot of ways, not just to see physically what would happen, based on, seeing a nuclear detonation, but psychologically what would happen as they watched it, and they could, they could see through their hands. It was so bright they could take a look at their hands and see the bones in their hands, and it had
Wow.
a tremendous impact on individuals. Some of them were like 18 years old, seeing this, uh, a weapon that continues to this day to be the sign and strength of a superpower. And so, and they were also doing research on radiation and what it could do to people, what it could do to animals. They knew that in some of the news footage that we saw, they talked about how the radiation from the detonations, what it was doing to pigs and, other animals that they tested, dogs. They tested dogs at the test site. But when you start looking at people who served us, served our country, made our country the most powerful superpower, we had to take we wanted to shine a light on the importance of service and recognizing for service. We all throw out the term "thank you for your service." Doug and I take that term very seriously. A lot of it has transpired because of, our interactions with Dave and others in his, the others connected to the military. The best thing we can do to thank them for our service is to actually give them the benefits that they deserve, and that's, again, what our hope is as we shine a light on that in the invisible enemy.
You mentioned HR 1400, Dave, and you've been to Washington now to start, working on this. How does it look? How does it? I mean, it's early on now. Do you have some gut feelings that it's heading in the right direction?
I do. Our challenge right now is getting co-sponsors to the bill. The bill was introduced in mid-February, and it took until this past week, late March, for the language of the bill actually to show up on congress.gov.
Okay.
So now the language for the bill is actually available. One of the things that I learned just anecdotally that has to do with this process is how short a bill actually is doing what we're doing. Because all it does is add sentence I to paragraph 1.2.3.4, insert that in there. I originally thought when we would do this that we were gonna have a small novel written in order to make all this happen, but it's actually far simpler than that. But now it's about getting co-sponsors. You mentioned going to Congress. So with next weekend being the Garden State Film Festival, on early Tuesday morning, I take off and I'm flying to Washington, D.C. with our executive director to go meet with a bunch of offices, bunch of congressional offices. And really who we deal with are the legislative directors, which is kind of the neck that turns the head in many ways, in these offices, to gain their support so that they can go talk to the member. Because to get an appointment with a member, unless you've got some huge string you can pull,
Excuse
there
me,
you go.
My granddaughter just popped in here. I'm busy recording here. Give me a kiss and
That's right. Grandkids are
I'll see
beautiful.
you in a little bit. I'm recording. Okay. So this is real.
Yeah.
What I love about what I do, it's real. And my granddaughter came to visit, and this is their office too. They sit with me while I'm doing stuff, and they watch videos and stuff.
But
Part
it's I just think like before we started, when we were getting to know each other earlier, I talked about politics is always about the narrative. This story about this group of people, in my opinion, is very, very powerful. It creates an emotional reaction when we have gone to these festivals, and every festival that has played our movie I go to, um, I'll see people in the audience start crying. I'll see them get pissed off. I'll hear the reactions as things are, through various scenes of it. And it creates a response, which is everything I could pray to have happen. And as we share this story, and in some of the offices, some of the congressional offices, some of the congressmen now have seen the movie. I find it very difficult for anybody to say no. Congress, every single time I talk to people, well, it's about the money. Okay. We find money for some pretty crazy things. In our government today, it's a big topic of, different things that have been exposed. Okay, great. This is probably going to cost a couple $1 billion to take care of these people, take care of these veterans, take care of their families. But if you look at the basic functions of government, it is military. It is about national defense and taking care of our veterans. That's at the very core. We can debate a lot of the other things that the government does. I don't think there's a debate on whether or not the government's to provide a military and care for its veterans. And so when the money comes up, the first time, and I'll just share, the first time I talked to House Veterans Affairs staff a year and a half ago, the Congress had just approved $40 billion for Ukraine. I don't have a dog in that fight. I don't have anything to do with that decision. But they brought up the money. And I said, look, here, politics being about narrative, your narrative is we need to help Ukraine. Okay, great. My narrative is we're going to spend a small fraction of the money that the government approved for Ukraine on this group of veterans. So if you want to run with the story that is we need to go help Ukraine, that's the most important thing we're going to do and not help these veterans, I'm going to run press releases about how this member of Congress is voting for Ukraine and against an American veteran. My experience in politics tells me that doesn't sell well. My experience we're blessed. We have a public relations firm that takes care of all of my media stuff. I go out looking like a smart guy when I go talk, and it's thanks to them. But our first press release that we did about our story got 54 million clicks. How many times do I have to run a press release that gets 50 million clicks with some Yahoo's name in it that's not going to support the American veteran until they lose? Those press releases cost me $2,000. I won't have to raise $2,000 too many times. So they want to talk about money. I'll talk about how we're going to win and how far my organization will go to make sure. So when you ask about how confident am I about us getting this through, we can do it politely or we'll come through with a steamroller, but we must, as a nation, take care. Take care of the guys that wore the uniform, the men and women. I say guys a lot. I'm not the most eloquent speaker, maybe.
No, guys
men and women that wore that uniform should be the priority.
Correct. Yep. Oof. By the way, you talked about emotion. So we talked about this before we went on air. I watched The Invisible Enemy. And I think before we went on air, I mentioned that music just held me. Outstanding music that conveyed the emotionality of what I was watching. Just great movie. But the Robert Krauss thing, that just
it's hard.
Yeah, what an amazing human being, and you know, the things that he's overcoming every day to live. And you said he loves living, and what a human being. Uh, and that just kind of, I mean, that just ripped into me um, emotionally. It's what you've done is powerful stuff here, and it's so simple. You know, just recognize people for the service. Simple little thing. Um, um, Mark, last question for you is why is this short documentary? I mean, it's pretty obvious listening to you guys. Why is this documentary important for people to see now?
You brought up the topic of thank you for your service. That's every time we hear that, we want to make sure that we really are thanking people who served us and take care of them. They've been taking care of us. It's time for us to take care of them. The time, I mean, this film is evergreen. It could happen at any time. It needs action, and what we're witnessing is Dave's passion and the other people in the Invisible Enemy organization, their passion, and we want it to get beyond just he has great people connected to his organization. We want this film to be discussed at film festivals. It was a big important part of what we wanted to do. Get in front. Dave mentioned he goes to all these festivals and to get in front of people to do Q&As, and often these Q&As stretch into the waiting room of the theater. They go beyond the 10-minute Q&A that you're allotted at the end of your film block. And because I think people are surprised, every one of us is somehow connected to the military, even if we don't have people in our family. It's what keeps this country going. And so why now? It's a wrong that needs to be addressed. And again, Dave talked about service connection for the lay people. It was something I tried to get my mind around when he talked about service connected. Whereas you can be, the VA can cover illnesses that are service connected. The fact that they're, because they're classified, they weren't there. That part, any of those, the radiation caused illnesses are not recognized because everything was classified. And Dave said earlier that the radiation it doesn't see color, it doesn't see gender. It moves through the people that are the sergeants and the colonels and the generals and the pilots. I'm speaking in lay terms. The
So,
military has designations, but we wanted people to recognize that it was impacting everyone. They were there to do a job. They knew that they were there to do a job that was dangerous, but there were hidden dangers that they weren't aware of. And you know, if you're brought up right in a family, when there is a wrong, you address that wrong and you make it right. So that's why now. And you know, this could have happened years and years ago, but Dave's discovery over time, with the people that are coming back, to him and telling people that served with him that have ailments unknown to be plausible from exposure to radiation, that's why the story needs to be addressed, because it is happening. And while it's invisible, it's detectable.
I wrote that down. By the way, if you see me writing, I keep writing and I keep taking notes even through this interview. I know Johnny Carson never wrote notes, but I'm writing notes, so I'm listening to you. Invisible but detectable, powerful stuff. Um, Dave, I know the answer, it's so obvious, but knowing what you know now, would you have still served? Um, I know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. There's no question.
Yeah.
You know, it's such, it was such an honor. And I look at my life, and I've had a blessed life. I have a great life. I have a wonderful family. Um, Next year, my wife and I will be married 40 years. Um, I deal with issues today, but the life I have is because of that. I met my wife stationed here. My first son was born at Nellis, at Nellis Air Force Base Hospital. It made me grow up from being an idiot senior in high school that thought beer was the most important thing in the world. So to say, for me to look back and say, no, I wouldn't have done it, is to say that I don't want the life I've had. I've had a beautiful life. And God willing, it'll go on for a long time.
Perfect, perfect. One last question. You're the filmmaker, Mark. I watched Academy Awards 2 weeks ago. I'm an indie author, and I am drawn magnetically to indie film people. I'm indie, 100%, and I was so gratified and innervated and elevated to see an indie film, quote unquote, an indie film getting recognized basically for everything: best picture, best director, best actress. It was a $6 million budget, and in the scheme of things, that ain't much. So your take, your take as an indie filmmaker, is this a harbor? Is this like throwing Tina Harbor? Is this a whole new world that we're approaching?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think when you talk about independent film and indie film, we really are indie film. We're a skeleton crew on our crew at Backlot Docs. We are, shoestring budget. We wear multiple hats. You mentioned some of the Oscar winners this year, or Marvel movies that have not necessarily the Oscar winner for Best Picture, but a lot of the other films have these remarkable budgets with 3 or 4 minutes of credits of people in their film. I like the fact that now we're in this kind of indie culture where people are telling stories, short-term content on TikTok or Instagram Reels, or whatever. Those are interesting to me, but those are people just picking up a phone and just kind of shooting things. That's, again, it's powerful, but to me, they're still we are still really connected to film, capital F. Um, the idea of the respect for the medium, the respect for the lens, the respect for the what we're shooting. Every single frame should matter. And in that regard, we want to make a film that matters. We were focused on telling stories in this film, and really wanted our individuals that we interviewed to tell their stories. And there's nothing more independent than that, especially when, again, there were crews larger. That Dave has been interviewed by crews that are much larger than ours, doing news stories, which is great. If we had the budget, it'd be awesome. It'd be amazing. But we're able to do what we do. We're trained in this medium. We have, we're um, union. We have union representation among our crew, and some are not in unions. But we have a skeleton crew telling independent stories with an independent lens, and that's critical. It's the same thing to me when I watch the Oscar, all the the Oscar nominees and everything. I watched just about every film that was nominated, including all the shorts and the short docs and the short narratives. And that was I was paying attention to what was the crux of their stories, what was their arc, how did they tell their story, and was it a quote unquote Hollywood story, or was it an independent lens? And again, I always celebrate the independent lens because I think the independent lens tells stories that are unbought and unbiased.
I agree. More honest. There's an honesty that emanates from an indie lens. I agree. There's an honesty. Well, there's no answering to a higher authority. You're independent, and there's more freedom and honesty in that, in my own opinion. And that was a great answer. And I certainly asked it to an appropriate as an indie filmmaker. So, we're done with this. What I think is an amazing, boy, what an amazing amount of time I spent with you guys before and doing this, so poignant, so meaningful. I'm so glad in some small way I can, and I'm officially inviting you to come back in any shape, way, form. I'm here. I want to keep growing what I do so that I can have more voice and more impact out there in the world. And you guys have, um, quoting Jim Morrison, you have lit my fire.
Standing.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, for us, this is so important. What you're doing for us, Calvin, is important because it's through this medium that our message is getting out there, and the efficacy that we're having in getting that message shared is fantastic, and it really is truly through this. And
yeah.
I hope that next week when my wife and I are at the film festival that we get to meet you.
I would love to be, listen, I have plans to be there. The last couple of years, I haven't been able to get there because, my knee and my knee, which was healed, sometimes it acts up, but it's a great knee now. So I would love to be there, especially Thursday night. I think is, that everybody gets together kind of thing and hangs out. So for sure. So yeah, I would love to meet you, truly, and we can talk. Uh, we can talk about a lot of stuff. And one of these days, Mark, I'll meet you. Maybe when
He's boring. There's
I actually I've been to Garden State Film Festival I think 3 or 4 times, and it's a great festival. And one thing that I think is, you talked about indie film. This is an indie festival run by a skeleton crew,
correct.
gets the job done. I mean, they're sending us daily updates on every film,
Yeah,
deep dive into the filmmakers. They they have great events. They have incredible auction items. I know that they have to support their film, and Nancy Diane. They are a remarkable. Um,
truly.
it's a
And
lot of fun.
there's a little I like to call things as I see it. Listen, I'm a Jersey guy. I've written an essay that New Jersey has won its independence from New York and Philly in just about every arena. We got Springsteen and Bon Jovi. We've got unbelievable restaurants. I write sometimes for a magazine how great our restaurants are. But in the film world, everybody forgets, film was invented here
Yeah.
by Edison. And then at the turn of the century, give or take, you had about, I don't know, hundreds of film studios here in Fort Lee, New Jersey, right over the bridge from New York. And then somebody came from California and said, "Well, come to California." That's how Hollywood got born. But it was all here. And it's coming back in ways because Netflix is building a $900 million studio, 10 minutes away. And then somebody else wants to put $1 billion studio in South Jersey. Spielberg is here next week shooting. So the Garden State Film Festival is in such a wonderful place in this world as a beacon for indie filmmakers, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, and going back to support their festival, they really do support indie filmmakers in a way that a lot of other festivals don't. I mean, we've had the great experience of being in some great festivals this year, and Garden State being is one of them. And I love the fact that they're sort of unbiased and unbought, right? They've got a great curation, great team, and like you said, there's nothing like New Jersey. I mean, you mentioned some great films, but I look at The Sopranos as being, the ultimate. And
Oh,
David Chase would be somebody that I would like to hang out with for a day, by the way.
oh, brilliant,
And
brilliant, brilliant. I mean, the whole that I've watched the whole thing a few times. Just brilliant. I got a chance to meet some of the actors, obviously, and of course James Gandolfino is a huge hero for me, only because of his amazing acting, and he's also a Rutgers grad, which I like.
I didn't realize. And then again, the last thing I was going to say is, we were just taken care of so well there. And as a filmmaker myself, when I first got to Asbury Park, and to be able to walk around and walk the boardwalk, see the stone ponies, see you know, the the springs. I went through a big Springsteen deep dive, because going back to what we're talking about here, it's a real American story, and nobody is. I mean, maybe Springsteen would be on my list. Bruce Springsteen would be on my list, because I don't know if anybody tells the American story as well as Bruce Springsteen. And um, again, he's obviously connected to
Yeah.
communities that don't have a voice necessarily, and expresses, his lyrics
Oh,
are matched and get to the
unbelievable.
heart right here. Talk about a great activist
Yep.
born from New Jersey roots, and incredible, just a story and a passion for telling stories, and
Truly.
that's influential in our careers too as
Yeah.
filmmakers.
Yeah. Oh, Springsteen. Hey, he lives 3 miles away from me.
Well,
And
maybe you can come to the thing, because there's nothing more American than the Invisible
he
Enemy.
and he's a free spirit, and he pops in. Listen, I know he pops into restaurants. He pops in all over the place. It's funny. A few years, 2 years before the pandemic, I had 30 exercises to do. For my back, my knees, and stuff, and you keep it healthy. And my first day at the gym with my piece of paper telling me the things I had to do, I was on the adductor machine at my new gym. And sometimes you feel there's a presence next to you. And I just looked at the machine like a foot away, and I did a double, triple, quadruple take because it was Bruce, on a machine. And I was a lucky guy because he and I were on the same schedule. So I saw Bruce 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, from 10:30 to 11:30. He was in the gym. I was in the gym, and eventually one day I didn't mess with him. That's his world, my world, his world. The only time I messed with him was when he came into my world, and he knew my trainer, and he was kind of BSing with my trainer. And I said to myself, all bets are off now. So he started to leave, and I said, "Hey, Bruce, come back." Uh, I said, "I just read your bio," which I did, and there's a half chapter devoted. And this is what I was telling him. I said, "I read your bio. There's a half chapter devoted to your favorite horse in the world." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Your horse is named Cal." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "It's my name." So he came over and he gave me a big hug, and we shook hands and we talked a little bit. And the sad thing about that is literally 3 days later, the pandemic hit and everything shut down. So I could have continued that relationship for years to come. And I had a lot of connections to Bruce. You live here, you have lots of connections. But anyway, um,
I was so moved by Bruce Springsteen that when I visited Garden State for the first time, we drove to his hometown and saw his
real.
his
Yeah.
original boyhood home. We found it. We drove by it. I just stood there and looked at it like I would look at any other significant monument in America. And I thought, again, going back to the idea of how does somebody he grew up in this house, and look where he is now, to have the global phenomenal, the success he's had as a writer, as a activist, as a someone who gives meaning to word. I mean, you just read his lyrics,
Yeah.
that. So to me, again, going back to full circle on this thing, some of the most influential parts as filmmakers for us, Springsteen's writing and the way he's turned it to music, Gandolfini
Yeah.
and David Chase and The Sopranos, telling real American stories. Like how do we end up like we ended up? So this again feeds into our role as filmmakers is to tell
Absolutely. Absolutely.
maybe centered and born out of New Jersey.
Yep, yep. What a great way to close this. I'm going to close this. I can't thank you enough for giving me the time and your passion and your energy and the work you're doing. I'm all yours. Come back. I'm just going to stop recording. Don't leave. We'll do a 30-second wrap. Thank you guys so much, Mark and Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.